Welcome to our podcast, Staffing Forward. My name is Geraldine Mensah-Date. I'm the founder of Pricer Solutions and Analytics and the host of the podcast, Staffing Forward, and I'm an AI implementation expert. So, the idea behind the show is pretty simple. We want to create a space where staffing and recruiting leaders can share real experiences about growing their firms and navigating the changes happening in the industry today. And there's a lot happening in staffing right now. Number one, tight candidate markets, changing client expectations, technology shifts, and increasing pressure on margins.
In general, I would say that part of the focus as I see it is that AI is no different than any typical product and or service that has been created. There's still areas where it needs to continually evolve. In my view, I would still say we're in the early stages of everybody's talking about it as a hot theme, hot item. Is it the know-all, end-all? Absolutely not. Ask me this question 5 or 10 years from now when this technology has been embedded a bit, has been evolved a bit, has had a bit more impact on real-time work experience in terms of its impact in the industry, then I think many of us will have a much greater and more qualified opinion as to the true impact of AI. Right now, we're all scrummaging through our own individual challenges and so forth as to how we're trying to adapt to this new resource coming into the market. But again, they're in the market right now. There are resources in terms of under AI that are very good, and then there are resources that are very bad, and everything else in between.
Today, we're going to dive into how staffing firms owners are growing their business and keeping margins healthy in the tightest candidate market. And we're going to focus on scaling recruitment for small teams. We have no other person than Mr. Larry Chisholm, Chief Executive Officer and at Qantas Management Resources, QMR. Larry is a talent acquisition leader and business entrepreneur with 25 plus years of expertise in full life cycle recruiting, B2B sales, nonprofit fundraising, retail, and small business management. Wow. Hey, Larry, welcome. And thank you so much for being on this call. I know you travel a lot. Where are you calling from today?
Yes, so I'm calling from just outside Boston, Massachusetts. That's where my business is practiced. And actually, that's also where I'm from.
Oh, wow. Okay. I love Massachusetts. I was once in Harvard Business School, so I know Boston a little bit, not too much. All right, so let's jump into it. Let's talk about your role and your business. Can you share a bit about your role and how it fits into the bigger picture at QMR? And
Sure.
what does
Sure. So again, again, thank you for that introduction. I appreciate it. And so for those that are listening, I'm the CEO and founder for Quantas Management Resources. Sometimes I use the acronym QMR because it's a little bit easier to say. Basically, my responsibility obviously is to manage the day-to-day activities for my practice. And so in that capacity, my focus obviously is to both escalate and build solid client relationships naturally in the field and in business of staffing. My job obviously is to try and identify the best possible talent for my clients for their needs, both short and long term. So clearly, there's been a lot going on as of late. I think probably the most current theme that's being talked about by a lot of people and professionals is AI and its impact, obviously, in the business as well as in the landscape, both personal and professional. And so, obviously, in my world, it's no secret that obviously it affects my practice as well. And so, hopefully, in our conversation today, I can kind of give you some insight as to how it has impacted my business specifically, and just kind of some thoughts that I may have in terms of how things are going both out in the landscape and just kind of overall my perspective on how technology in general has impacted our lives, especially professionally. And that's kind of my 2 cent pitch, so to speak.
Great. That's very interesting. And I like where you're starting from. So I'll just jump into something that is very passionate to you, listening to you. What major shifts are you seeing in your industry right now? I know you mentioned AI, you mentioned technology and all other things, but and how has that trend impacted your business or growth strategy. Your company is in that category of up to about 11 employees. So I want to see whether is this categorized as a small team? And if it's a small team, what major shifts are you seeing that is affecting or impacting growth strategy?
Okay. Well, basically, I think before I kind of get into that, I think it's important to provide some context because I
Okay.
think, in understanding what's going on, again, I offer my professional opinion. I'm sure there's a lot of variety of opinions out there, but it offers some context. As you highlighted earlier in your comments, I've been in the business now for about a little over 25 years. So naturally, during that time, I've seen a lot of impact and changes in the industry overall. Emphasis on technology, again, to kind of go back to the beginning, so to speak. And when I first got into the business, the internet, as we know it and understand it, was still kind of a new practice. But the current theme was that it basically changed the value proposition of how we offer services to our client. And so obviously that changed things a bit in terms of both service providers like myself, as well as expectations from clients who are looking to utilize our resources. Fast forward a little bit, now we have the introduction of social media, Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and such, and how that again has impacted the landscape. And again, the value proposition of what we as service providers offer to our clients. Now here we are in the present talking about AI and its impact. So again, the current theme here is value proposition and how it has changed both how we are perceived as deliverers of service and how our services are received. So from a technology standpoint, I think what professionals like myself are experiencing, and this is in no particular order, but obviously a part of it is essentially identifying candidates, qualifying individuals, obviously trying to isolate and identify the best possible talent resources for our client. Now, from my experience, how that has impacted and changed things is in many ways it has made conducting that task a bit easier, both from a time consuming standpoint. It takes less time to obviously identify, collect, and gather and qualify or pre-qualify a potential candidates for opportunities. And also too, it has made things a bit easier in terms of organizing and collaborating that activity and that's on the pros side. On the con side, it's put some fear out there and concerns on both sides of the equation. From a candidate standpoint, in terms of concerns about fewer jobs being available, jobs being replaced by AI, and to an extent, I can't say that that's entirely untrue because yes, there are many companies out there that have based strategic, both short and long term decisions with the emphasis of how AI has made their internal operations a bit more efficient. But then there's also been other variables that have impacted. So it's not solely AI. Obviously, not too recently, we were dealing with COVID, and that had changed the landscape overall in many ways, personal and professional. But again, these are different factors in addition to the technology that have played a role in how the landscape has changed for professional service providers as well as recipients. So in general, I would say that part of the focus as I see it is that AI is no different than any typical product and or service that has been created. There's still, areas where it needs to continually evolve. In my view, I would still say we're in the early stages of everybody's talking about it. It's kind of a hot theme, hot item. Is it the know all end all? Absolutely not. Ask me this question 5 or 10 years from now when this technology has been vetted a bit, has been evolved a bit, has had a bit more impact on work, real time work experience in terms of its impact in the industry. Then I think many of us will have a much greater and more qualified opinion as to the true impact of AI. Right now, we're all kind of scrummaging through our own individual challenges and so forth as to how we're trying to adapt to this new resource coming into the market. But again, they're in the market right now. There are resources in terms of under AI that are very good, and then there are resources that are very bad, and everything else is kind of in between. So again, we're going through the sorting out phase. I've used the term "wild wild west." I think it's probably appropriate now, and so as we all kind of navigate through this, that's kind of what we're doing.
Perfect. I like that. So in your company, I know a few things are working for you, your value proposition based on your business model and all that. What is working well right now that has, and what has been frustrating? You touched on those a little bit, but I just want to be specific so that our listeners could identify them clearly. What is actually specifically working well right now, which you can talk about, and what is frustrating? And then also, if you can add, what metrics are you most focused on improving with your
Okay.
working well, frustration,
Yeah.
and what metrics are you?
Sure. So, one example I think that's fair to say in terms of how technology and how this has impacted my business, me personally, professionally, in a positive way, has been both the ability to be a bit more expedient, both in ascertaining and being able to qualify and pre-qualify potential candidates. I mean, obviously, there have always been resources and tools out there, but again, in my line of work, aside from quality, obviously the other variable is expediency, being able to get, your services delivered to the client within a reasonable amount of time so they can act upon and benefit from those services. And
Mhm,
so, for example, I can say that in my personal profession and during my tenure, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a generalist, but I've had the opportunity to recruit for a wide range of different industry spaces. So from technology to healthcare to engineering, et cetera, I recruited out of those different industry verticals. Having said that, is my background from there? No. So a lot of what I have done has been contingent upon both my learning within those industry verticals and spaces. And
mhm,
so with the introduction of technology, especially AI, as we see it now, how that has helped me is become a bit more proficient, especially when it
mhm,
comes to asking and identifying specific criteria and questions that I'm
mhm,
trying to apply in qualifying, pre-qualifying candidates for my clients. And not just general questions. I mean, in the weeds, specific types of questions that really kind of give you a good sense of if this person has a true ownership of their particular
mhm,
trade craft. And if so, these types of resources and queries are able to, lift them to the surface. And so someone for myself who may not have an expert background in that, I can come across asking those particular expert questions and get the kind of feedback that I need in order
mhm,
to present to my client and say with a large degree of confidence, yes, I believe we have identified someone that is worth your time to pursue, talk to, and perhaps retain, given obviously your understanding and degree of acceptance in their qualifications. Obviously, the frustrating aspects out there naturally is again time management, being able to mobilize and obviously make the most amount of impact in the time that I have every day, week, month, etc. And so those are individual challenges that I'm continually obviously pursuing and fighting. Technology has played a factor in helping me nip some of that and cross some of those challenges off the list. But again, it's a continual thing. And so, with that, I'll say, and I'll include myself in this analysis, I think for many people and for many firms, it's really contingent upon how they are currently running their operations and how open those operations are and receptive to integrating new technologies and new ways of doing things. So, for example, when you have a newer company, it's a lot easier to introduce new concepts because you're in the process of creating a foundation of what are your typical to-dos in terms of how you go about running your company. Whereas if you're
mhm,
much more established, you've been in the business a much longer, there are certain practices and such that you have come to rely on that are just part of your habits. And so, as I'm sure you can appreciate, sometimes habits are hard to break. And even if it's necessary to remove some of those habits in favor of more efficient habits, there's still
mhm,
the psychology of it. So it takes time. So, and also in the larger organizations too, maybe that may play a factor because again, I like to use the analogy with large organizations, they're like oil tankers. They may turn left or right, but a bit slower, as opposed to new organizations, new companies, they're like speedboats. You turn left, it's a sharp left. You turn right, it's a sharp right. So it's a lot easier to adjust to these kinds of things as they're
mhm,
coming in. The last point that I want to kind of throw in there to kind of bring this all together is, being a talent acquisition professional, we are in a unique place in terms of promoting much of this resource and technology because, again, we are tapped upon, whether it be in-house or as external service providers, to obviously provide our counsel and our advice and our application of some of these tools and resources. And so to some extent, that has played a factor in, maybe the challenges that candidates are having out there in being either identified for opportunities or trying to obviously acquire or get opportunities, job opportunities themselves. And so, I'll give you two examples. One example, which is kind of simplistic, but I think the principle is applicable here. Some years ago, I was working on a client for recruiting for a number of engineers. And so essentially, I was doing my traditional sourcing and so forth. And I came across a resume that, in short, really wasn't particularly impressive. Quite frankly, it was in such condition that I was kind of scratching my head why someone would put their resume out there in such a way. And so naturally, curiosity got the better of me. I had literally some free time. And so just kind of on a random occurrence, I reached out to this person. Long and short of it is that as I started talking with them, I realized, okay, well, what I'm seeing online on paper here and who I'm talking to, they're not connecting. And so it was pretty clear to me that, the light bulb went up and I said, something, the reason why their resume looks so terrible, but yet they don't sound terrible is that this person is too busy doing their job as opposed to taking time polishing their resume. So in short, they're getting the job done. Long and short of it, I helped them kind of polish their resume up a little bit, present it to my client. My client, interviewed them, hired them, and they had become a really good contributor to the business. The moral of that story is that had I not taken the initiative, even if it was just at random, to kind of poke a little bit further and identify that this was a really good candidate, that could obviously benefit my client, that wouldn't have happened where
Right.
AI would come into an equation like that, used as an example, this person would have fallen through any kind of keyword search algorithm, whatever, and they would have never been considered. Hence, this is a talent that would not have been within the radar of any particular recipient of their services, and it would have been their loss. Okay,
Right.
so this is a good example of kind of a pros and cons, simplistic, but I think you get the principle of it.
I
And
do. I
so,
do.
and so, basically, where I'm going with this is that these are, again, the continual elements that need to evolve with the technology as it relates to both our implementation of it and being, I don't want to say guardians, but definitely to some extent police in terms of making sure that the technology does not override our intuition, our
Right.
experience,
Mhm.
our decision making, our judgment to really come in and say, okay, yes, the technology gets us so far, but now we have to take it to the finish line. That's where we're in a key part to really make sure that this is being implemented and applied efficiently and effectively.
Larry, you nailed it. You nailed it because technology will take you far, but then what we call human in the loop will always be the truth. And
Yes.
that example you gave is a very good example of what technologists will say human in the loop, even though we have tools that are going to help us speed. And I think for our viewers or listeners, what Larry is trying to say is basically technology is good. It's not replacing anyone in the recruitment business, but it's going to help you scale so that you have time to do that extra step, that extra help for your candidates to take them to the desk or the table of the recruiter. I applaud you. That is a very good example. So I want to look at your future. You are very strategic. I see that you have strategy for your business, how you're going forward, and then you have plans. I want to know, so where do you want to be 6 or 12 months from now? And if you could solve one major challenge today, what would that be?
Okay. So that's a great question. And so what I'll say is, what did I say? Timing is everything. And so right now, you caught me at a time where I've been really taking, not another look, but kind of recalibrating. I think is probably the best word. My practice in terms of how I've done things before and what I would like to change in that and moving forward and where I want to take my practice. So the 6 to 12 month question is kind of it's a good question to answer. However, I'm in a place where it's kind of an evolving situation. I would say by the end of that 6 to 12 months, I will have a better sense of where I'm at and where I see my
Okay.
business going. But to give you kind of maybe some anticipation or expectation to some degree, I'm looking at obviously recalibrating my practice to servicing a narrower view of industry spaces, specifically legal, engineering and
Mhm.
construction is an area that I want to,
Okay.
stay within, and the biotech pharma arena is also an area. So those are kind of three top categories that I'm looking to kind of narrow my focus and moving forward.
Mhm.
So as an industry space service provider, those are the areas that I would like to focus more on.
Okay.
I made significant strides in the legal space. So the
Mhm.
goal is obviously looking to expand that and cement, kind of create foundation of activities that I can say, yes, this is how I see myself growing in this area and moving forward. In terms of my practice itself, I'm looking at, and still kind of in the decision making aspect of, how do I want to grow my practice? Right now, it's really a combination of network relationships that I have my practice built upon. But am I looking to kind of grow a firm? I don't know. Those are things that, as these activities kind of come to the surface and I start seeing more results from that standpoint, that will kind of be a major influencer and where I see myself growing my practice. So again, that's kind of a in progress thing, maybe for a later conversation to see how I'm progressing. The if there was one thing that I would probably say, that a single focus, I would say right now, in terms of short term priority, I think that my
Mhm.
primary focus is obviously, identifying and coming up with the best possible way to source out, candidates,
Mhm.
passive candidates, active candidates, because I think in terms of where my practice is right now, that is probably the single biggest focus that if I'm able to really, perfect that and really develop that, everything else really grows from there. Because when you talk about, for example, building new client relationships, of course, yes,
Mhm.
that's important, but it all comes down to your ability to deliver on what you say you can do. And so, obviously, a major part of that being a staffing professional is being able to help them identify people are good fits for the organization. Now, that being said, I think I have a unique advantage given my both longevity in the business and just the
Mhm.
path that I've taken during that time in the business. It has allowed me to develop an appreciation and understanding that goes a little bit beyond staffing. Yes, I mean, it's important to be able to identify, the right kind of talent and be able to, marry them to the right kind of opportunity. But also to, I think it's also equally important to be able to understand your clients, understand, the nuances of their business, the internal workings of their operations, what are their particular challenges in terms of whether it be growing pains or external issues, competition, market conditions, things of that nature, and those are subject matters that may not necessarily on the surface appear to be
Mhm.
staffing related, but are ultimately necessary if you want to bring all those and collaborate all those resources and perspectives to help you to position you to
Mhm.
identify and qualify the right kind of talent. And I'll give you a simple example with that. So, you can identify two people that on paper, look, very much the same in terms of skills and experience and background.
Mhm.
And then obviously you're looking to present them, to a single opportunity. And this opportunity may have in itself unique challenges. And so where you present one candidate that essentially goes in there and basically operates under a quote unquote a pressure cooker, they kind of take to pressure like a dry sponge of water. You take that other candidate that looks kind of like the mirror image of them, you put them in that same situation and they're like a deer in the headlights. They freeze, they don't know what to do. And so this is where you now gradually see the difference between the two candidates. But in order to do that, you need to identify before you put either of those in that situation, what are the precursors? What are the flags I need to be looking for that says this person's going to take the pressure like a dry sponge of water, whereas this person here may not so. And some of that may be contingent upon their background, their experiences, things like that come during the qualifying stage. But you won't have an appreciation of that and how to custom format that to your client unless you understand your client.
Mhm.
Hence,
Mhm.
again, knowing them, understanding their challenges, their internal, aches and pains, things of that nature. And then
Mhm.
once you kind of come to that understanding,
Mhm.
then everything else kind of comes together. So going back
Yes.
to what I initially said, the candidate, obviously, my ability to be able to have that, that magic fishing net, if you will, to go out, and collect the kind of people that I'm looking for my client, obviously would be a lot easier for me. And then with that, I can then build new relationships with people that I may not have necessarily had any prior experience with, but I can come in and say, hey, listen, I understand in terms of what your challenges are, and I may have some individuals that might be of interest to you. Would you be interested in having a conversation? And let's talk about these people and such. So I'm kind of throwing a lot at you, but I think you get the gist of where I'm coming
I
from.
get it. That's very
So
good. Awesome, awesome. That's great. So, very interesting conversation. Do you think you mentioned sourcing, and
yeah.
a few of my guests have also talked about sourcing as one of their pain points. Do you think this is
Mhm.
an industry-wide issue or more unique to like your business? What do
Mhm.
you think?
That's a good question. And I guess what I'll say is basically during the time that I've been in the business, there's always going to be a supply of candidates.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
And when we talk about, let's say, technology, for example, that's always going to have an impact on that supply of candidates. But I look at it as no different than any other time period where maybe the subject matter was a different topic, maybe social media, or maybe
Hmm.
the introduction of the internet and such, as I mentioned in my earlier comments.
Hmm.
Because right then and during that time, it's difficult to see beyond that. That's the central focus. That's what's gathering people's attention. That's what's occupying their minds, so to speak. Well, now we're in that period where it's AI. This is the current thing. What will the new thing be 10 years from now? And such,
Yeah.
and what will that be? And we won't be able to look. It'll be difficult to look beyond that. So I look at this as no different than any other challenge. It's just yes, it's custom formatted to events that are going on right now. So I guess I'll answer that question by saying that
Hmm.
there's always going to be a population of candidates that are going to be looking for new opportunities for a wide range of reasons, and it all comes down to do you have something that's of interest to them and that they
Hmm.
are, I guess, reasonably qualified for that is worth obviously escalating to a new opportunity for them.
Yeah.
So, so I guess I'm not giving you a negative or a positive answer. I'm just simply saying that. Well, I think I'm just simply saying that we're going through a time now where this is the issue now, and this is the challenge that we're dealing with now. And so, having been in the business as long as I have, I've been through those now situations where now it's social media, and how is that going to change the landscape? Now it's the internet. How is that going to change the landscape? Well, now it's AI and we're dealing again with the issue. So all I can simply say is that the challenge may be a bit different.
Hmm.
I wouldn't necessarily say harder, easier, just different.
Different. Yeah. Thank you so much. Larry, that was great. I could listen to you all day, and thank you for sharing these insights. Once we've compiled all our postcard conversation, I'll send over a summary that should be really interesting. Such a powerful conversation. Before we wrap up, here are the
Sure.
key takeaways from today's conversation from Larry. Larry, I took some notes whilst I was listening to you. And what I would say to our viewers is if you want to scale recruitment, even if it's a small team or a big team, you have to get three things working together: your value proposition, your technology, and how you approach sourcing challenges. And your value proposition is what attracts the right clients and candidates in the first place. Your technology is what allows you to operate efficiently and at scale. And your sourcing strategy is where most teams either unlock growth or get stuck. Larry, this is great. And so I want to thank you. Thank you for jumping on. And I'm sure I would connect with you another time on some other topics because there's a ton
Sure.
of strategies that we want to learn from you. And so
Sure.
thank you. And I want to say thank you to our viewers and have a great day.
Thank you.